Just a second. What are you waiting for? Some of you that was painful for some of you, I can tell. The silence is not easy. I really want you to think about for a second, what are you waiting for? We wait for everything, don't we? We hate waiting. Does anybody else hate waiting in traffic? Man, I hate that one. What about waiting at the airport? Has anybody else almost missed a flight because you did not want to get there early enough to have to wait? Has anybody actually missed a flight? I've never actually missed a flight. That would be impressive. Yes, we've had someone. We wait for our wives, men. Come on. I'm the only one, I guess. But yeah, I wait for my wife. Do you wait for things happily ever? I don't know. I feel like that's something that I really have a hard time with, is just being happy while I wait. And then if you start looking at like waiting rooms and the way that people test people who are in waiting rooms, there's some sick and sadistic things. So I saw there was a study done where people put all these actors in a waiting room, and then they had one test subject come into the waiting room, and every time a beep went off, all the actors would stand up, and then they'd sit back down. And then a few minutes later, a beep would come on, they'd stand up, sit back down. The third time, the beep came on, they stood up, and the test subject, she stood up too. She's like, I guess this is what we're doing now. And so she sat down, and slowly all of the actors left, and then a new test subject came into the room. And the beep came on, and even though all the other people were gone, the first test subject, she stood up. And the other guy was like, what are you doing? And she's like, I don't know, everyone else was doing it when I got in here. We mess with people in waiting rooms. There was one experiment done in the 50s. I don't think this experiment would fly today, but there were a bunch of actors in a waiting room, and they put one test subject in the room with all the actors, and the room started filling with smoke. And all the actors just acted like everything's fine. And they just sat there with the smoke, and they all started coughing, and I'm sure that they inhaled smoke. And finally, the test subject wouldn't leave the room because everybody else acted like the smoke was fine. Here's what I do know about waiting. Waiting is hard, but it's also good for you. It's a good thing to not live a life of instant gratification. So we're talking about that today. I want you to seriously think about in your life, what are you waiting for? Maybe if you're waiting for a relationship, maybe there's a person that you feel like you're waiting for. Maybe there's a spouse that you think may be out there for you that you haven't found yet. You're waiting for that relationship. Maybe you're waiting for that relationship to be over. You have found the person that you thought it was, and then you're like, now I'm just waiting to get out of that relationship. Maybe you're waiting to have kids. That's a hard one. Some people are waiting for your kids to leave the house, to be rid of your kids. Some people may be waiting for retirement. That's like the next thing that you feel like you're waiting for. I really identify with this feeling of sensing I'm waiting for something. And I want you to think about it today. Seriously, think about what you're waiting for. We've been in this series called Hope and a Future, and it's based on Jeremiah 29:11. And this is, I believe, the 6th week of the series, and we finally are going to get to Jeremiah 29:11. Can someone say, praise God, we're done? So I'm going to give you a quick recap of what we've talked about. We started off the series talking about calling. God gave Jeremiah this really incredible calling, and we used Jeremiah's calling to teach all of us about calling. So I created, based on Jeremiah 1, basically a way to make your calling into like a math equation. So it's a God-given gifting plus a need you can't ignore plus the people he is calling you to. That's your calling. That was week 1. Week 2, we talked about the infidelity of all of us and humanity, the way that God had Jeremiah teach about it was to talk about broken cisterns that can't hold water. We've forsaken him, the well of living water. We talked about our infidelity and what that does. Week 3 was a real treat. We talked about the dangers of the heart. If you've ever read Jeremiah 17, Jeremiah says the heart is deceitful above all things. And so we talked about how to let a renewed mind lead your heart. Don't just follow your heart. It's terrible advice. And then last week, our friend Clifton Stan did a great job helping us learn how to seek the peace of the city. And he talked about it's about putting down roots. And it's not just about putting down roots. It's about who you do it with and how you do it. And so today we're finishing the chapter 29, Jeremiah 29. We're going to read verses 10 through 14. And right now, the Israelites, when they read this letter, I think maybe there were 2 times they read it. The first time they read it was when they first got it. They had just gotten to Babylon. If you want to think about what they'd been through, they'd gone from Jerusalem, which is on the closer to the western side of Israel, all the way to Babylon, which is modern-day southern Iraq. And they were exiles there, and when they got there, they got this letter pretty soon after they had arrived to Babylon. And so they went, it was only a 600-mile, if you did as a crow flies, it's 600 miles. But because of the terrain in Israel and the way that the river runs, it takes between 900 and 1,000 miles for them to get to the end of this exile. And so it has been a grueling journey. If you want to put that in perspective for us, it would be like if you and I tried to hike to Austin, Texas. It's insane. So they spent a couple years kind of living with their bags packed, waiting to go back home to Jerusalem. They had this false prophet in Jerusalem named Hananiah, and Hananiah had prophesied, we're only going to be in Babylon 2 years, and then we get to go back home. And so people believed this guy. They didn't want to believe Jeremiah, who said it was actually going to be 70 years. And so they got this letter, it said 70 years. They believed Hananiah's false prophecy that it would only be 2 years. And then a few years later, I think they maybe reread this prophecy, because in 586 BC, Jerusalem was burnt to the ground. And so all the people who had been told this 70-year prophecy finally started believing it. Okay, I guess we're not going back. And so they were waiting, and who here knows that sometimes waiting can turn into hopelessness? Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. I'm telling you, it can break your heart when you're waiting and then you lose hope. And I believe that's exactly what happened to these exiles. Their hope had been crushed, and it made them heartsick. And so I don't know where you're at. I don't know if there's a hope that you had, something that you were waiting for, and now you're just left in this disappointment of your hope has been pushed off too much and you've lost hope. And waiting has turned into hopelessness. But I believe God has a word for you, if that's you. So we're going to go right into Jeremiah chapter 29, starting in verse 10. This is what the Lord says, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. Finally, we get to verse 11. Here we go. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. That's what our whole series has been about. Hope and a future. And God has plans. And can we just be really honest for a second? Because I was at my mom's house a few weeks ago, and she still had a bunch of graduation cards from when I graduated high school. And I saw this verse on the graduation cards. And I thought, you know what? If I had to guess about what hope in a future would look like, it actually wouldn't look like what my current situation is. Does anybody else feel the disconnect from what you feel like hope in a future should look like and what your life actually looks like? Hope in a future for me would be like having plenty of money, sending my kids to private school, leading a church that's exploding, reaching tons of people and building a huge building. And like, I have these ideas of what I think hope in a future would look like that are actually different than what I believe God has for me. And so here's the thing. God's version of hope in a future doesn't look like what you think hope in a future should look like. And if you look at these people living this life that got this letter, here's what we know. We know that hope and a future come living in the in-between. So basically, they had been taken captive, they were in exile, and God said, I've got hope and a future for you. Even though the people he was speaking to, most of them would never leave the exile. God said, I've got hope and a future for you. They found these tablets pretty recently, actually. They resurfaced in the 70s. They're called the Al Yahudu tablets. You could look them up. They're really interesting. But it shows business dealings, marriages, taxes that were paid by the descendants of these first generation exiles. These Jewish people that were living in southern Iraq. It was Babylon at the time. And you know what they named their kids? They named their kids words like, God is great. Yahweh is great. Yahweh is peace. Yahweh is faithful. And so what it tells me is that they caught the vision for this living in the in-between space. And so when you think about the gap between where you are right now and where you feel like hope in a future would be, whether maybe it's financially, maybe it's your career, maybe it's a relationship or a lack of relationship, I want you to know God has a plan for you right now in this in-between space. And it's a good plan. It's hope and a future. Even though it feels like a waiting room, and we hate waiting rooms. My brother-in-law, back in 2010, he's like a traveling Christian recording artist. His name is Josh Wilson. And he was stuck in an airport in Newark, New Jersey. And someone had gone the wrong way through a security checkpoint to say goodbye to their loved one. And because they went the wrong way through the security checkpoint, they had no idea where this person went, and they had to take everyone that had already gone through security and get them back out. Every single person in this busy airport had to go through security again. And so for hours and hours, every plane was stopped. Every person, they were jam-packed into this airport. It was an in-between space. But I love my brother-in-law because he chose to take this annoying, frustrating, in-between space and make the most of it. And I think we've got a video of what it looked like.
Here we go, 3, 4.
I love that video because it shows that life happens in the in-between spaces, and we can make the most of the in-between space. And so even though there may be something where you feel like your hope has been deferred and it's made your heart sick, there's still a future. There's still hope, and there's still a future because there's still Jesus. So I didn't read the whole proverb, by the way. Proverbs 13:12. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. Another way to say it is, when desire comes, it is a tree of life. And so there's actually a way forward, even when you feel like your hope has been put off so far that you've lost hope. I love that imagery of the tree of life. What does it make you think of? Adam and Eve. So if you go back all the way to the beginning of humanity, the tree of life is there. And actually, if you fast forward all the way to the end, if you go to Revelation, they talk about how in heaven, there is a tree of life. And it's not, so we get this idea that like, okay, hope in a future is far away. Hope in a future is heaven. I have to wait till the end of my life till hope in a future. But that's not how God treated these Israelites. He said he has hope in a future for them right now. This may be a disconnect for some of us when we think about following Jesus. You may have this idea that the reward for believing in Jesus and following Jesus and saying no to the things of the world isn't going to come until heaven. And it's true that like ultimately you will find the best version of life after this life. But even right now, there is hope and a future for you right now. And God tells them how in the next verse. Verse 12, here's what he says. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me, and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. Really simply put, hope in a future come through a relationship with Jesus. And so a lot of preachers will stand up and say, you can have a good life if you just do good things. And that's not true. We believe there is only one way to be saved. We believe there's only one way into eternity, and that's not a popular opinion. And it's not like we want to talk down to people who don't agree with what I'm saying. I have just found that my relationship with Jesus and following him and living by his word, that's the only way I'm going to live. And it's the only way I'm going to lead people to live. And so hope in a future come through a relationship with Jesus. He tells them to do three things. He says, call, come, and pray. Call, come, and pray. Isn't it cool that the things that God tells them to do, he's not telling them to go do those things. They're all like relational things with him. Call, come, and pray. And they're not just things that are in the Old Testament. These things get carried in to the Jesus followers in the New Testament too. So Romans 10:13 says, all who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. Call. And then he says, come. Matthew 11:29, Jesus himself says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come. And then he says, pray. Matthew 6:6, Jesus is teaching his disciples. He says, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. It's relational. Hope in a future was always meant to be relational. And it was meant to be relational with your relationship with God. And so here's how it works. We just read the verses that say this. When you call, you're saved. When you come, he gives you rest. And when you pray, he listens. And if you go back to Jeremiah 11, he says, when you seek, not half-heartedly, not when it feels right, not when it's convenient for you, but when you seek a relationship with God with all your heart. You want to see what putting all your heart into something looks like? You need to watch the Winter Olympics. If you're not watching the Winter Olympics, you are missing out. My wife is an Olympics freak. She loves watching the Olympics. People look at her funny because of how much she loves the Olympics. But the other night we were watching downhill skiing, and they were talking about the G's that these downhill skiers take on their knees, like going down. And there was an American. Her name's Breezy Johnson. And she was injured before the 2022 games, so she didn't get to race in the last Olympics. But she spent every moment focused, training. She even, when she couldn't train, she was knitting herself headbands. And she would knit herself a headband for the next race, and she would keep her mind in it. And I'm telling you, these Olympic athletes, they know how to put their heart into something. I want to live for Jesus the way they train for the Olympics. I want to put my heart and soul into it, because here's what it says. You will find me when you seek me with all your heart. Ask anyone who's ever said they've found God. It is the greatest reward in life. It's all you need. And it's not just a every once in a while thing. relationships are meant to be rhythmic. So like every day, investing in your relationship with God. I get up, every morning I get on my knees. I have Osgood Slaughter, so I can't get on the ground, but I have a prayer kneeler. I kneel on next to my bed. It's a little pad my wife got me. I get in the Word every single day. I read something from the Word. It doesn't always feel like a life-transforming thing every single morning, but sometimes, man, it really wrecks me in the best way imaginable. It's meant to be daily. It's meant to be weekly, coming together like this. This is part of it. Being around people who will encourage you in your faith, who will challenge you when you need it. And really, it's more than being in rows. It's why we believe in groups. You can join a group right now. We got men's groups, women's groups, everyone groups. This is how we're supposed to follow Jesus, is together. And the cool thing is, when you seek him and you find him, when you seek it with all your heart, it doesn't just affect you. Verse 14, it says, I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity. And I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. Now, the Hebrew language is different than English. English only has one way of saying you. So the plural you and the singular you is the same. I'm from Texas, where we have a different language. We have a plural you. It's called y'all. And so when God is talking to the Israelites, he's actually using the Texan language. He's saying, I know the plans I have for y'all. To give y'all a hope and a future. Plans to prosper y'all, not to harm y'all. It's enough y'alls for all year, I think. But the funny thing is, even though he's saying y'all, he doesn't actually mean y'all. Because he just said it's going to be 70 years before they go back. Do you know what the average life expectancy is in the 700s BC? 35. 2 lifetimes of the average people. And so almost none of these people ever got to see the promised land ever again. They died in Babylon. You know what this tells us? It's not just about us. That's what he was telling them. It's not just about them. This is telling us God has hope and a future for the next generation. Sometimes it can be really easy to become discouraged about the next generation. There are some hooligans in my neighborhood, and some of them have my last name and live at my house. Right? Like, it can get really easy to get into that. Oh, this next generation is going to hell. But God has hope and a future for the next generation. And I am choosing to believe it. I'm asking you to believe it with me. And there's kids in the room right now. And I want you to know you are bringing hope and a future to the next generation. God is going to use you to bring hope and a future. We got some of our students that are getting baptized today. And I believe what God is doing for them is going to affect the next generation and the generations that come after them. God has hope and a future for the next generation. So if you got kids, change your mentality. If you get annoyed by your neighbor's kids, change your mentality. If you're single and you feel like I don't have anything to do with the hope with hope in the future reaching the next generation, let me tell you, you do. Because there are people in the next generation that look up to you. Even if you're not a parent, even if you don't have kids in your home or on your street, every single one of us collectively, we have the responsibility of pouring into the next generation. Because God has hope and a future for the next generation. It's about legacy. It's about something living beyond us. A philosopher named William James said this in 1900. The great use of a life is to spend it for something that will outlast it. And then to kind of continue the thought, there was actually a biographer named Ralph Barton Perry. He continued the thought of James. He said, James believed every act of courage, every secret victory over despair adds a permanent drop to the ocean of human possibility. Listen to this last line. We do not just live our lives, we deposit them into the future. And it's a future where your kids are and where the next generation will be, even when we're not. Some of you have been hearing me talk, and there's a disconnect because you have already lost hope. And maybe you're a little bit numb to this idea of really getting to experience hope in a future. Hope in a future, living in the in-between. Hope in a future in a relationship with Jesus. Hope in a future for the next generation. It's not connecting. And if that's you, can I just be honest with you? There were some times in the last week when I feel like I lost hope about some things. You're not the only ones that feel this like hopelessness, whether it's about your finances, maybe it's about your career, maybe it's about your marriage, sex life, maybe it's about your kids. Hope is something that God can restore right now. Hope is not, when hope is not present, it doesn't mean it's not lost. Let me tell you a couple things that helped. I kept connecting with the Lord, even when I didn't feel like it. Hit my knees in the morning, went downstairs and read my Bible and tried to take some notes about what God might be saying to me. I processed with my wife. She's my best friend. She'll tell me the truth even whenever it's hard to hear. And then I talked to another friend, and I complained to him for probably 45 minutes. And then he just reminded me that my problems aren't that big. And it's like God used these things to restore hope. And so it sounds really practical, but maybe you need a group. Maybe you need to come to my men's group tonight. Maybe there's another group you need to be part of this week. You need people in your life who will speak into it. We're meant to experience hope in a future in community. And it's beautiful. And then God's word, I think, really is one of the things that has always kept me back on track whenever I try to lose track. And so don't discount that. It's good. And some of you are feeling like I still didn't touch what you're thinking or feeling because you've got some deep-seated pain in your life. If that's you, if you're dealing with some deep pain, I just want you to know I'm sorry. God doesn't want to diminish your pain. I don't want to diminish your pain. But I can tell you that even when you feel unsafe, when you feel like you're in the darkest place, God still has hope and a future for you. I've been learning that there's 3 things to remember when you feel unsafe in life. And I think actually these Judeans who were in exile needed to hear it too. The 3 things you need to hear when you feel unsafe is, number 1, you're empowered to make decisions. Or actually, I got my order wrong. Number 1, it won't always be this way. Whether it's good, it won't always be good. If it's bad, it won't always be bad. Life is always changing. Number 2, you are empowered to make decisions. And number 3, you are not alone. In other words, God's telling the Judeans they're not always going to be in exile in Babylon. Number 2, they are empowered to make decisions. Last week we talked about seeking the peace of the city, building houses, marrying your kids off, like choosing to live your lives. Number 3, you're not alone. God told them, you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. It's the same for you. When you feel unsafe in a circumstance, you need to remember those things. Remember you're not alone. Remember that you are empowered to make a choice. Remember that it won't always be this way. I think about living in the in-between and just going back to the idea that hope in a future it's not like where you arrive. It's what you find when you're on your way or even when you feel stuck. Because that's really how these exiles felt. They felt stuck. And man, I can't tell you how many times I felt stuck in the last year, last week even. So if you feel stuck, I want to encourage you that it's okay to feel stuck sometimes because God has hope in a future for you even when you feel stuck. They were a group of people that feel stuck. They felt stuck on one of the hardest days in our nation's recent history. It was September 11th, 2001. And 2 planes had hit the World Trade Centers. There was a plane that had hit the Pentagon. Another plane had been taken by hijackers and then went down in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania because they tried to take the plane back. The passengers did. And so all the flights in the U.S. were stopped. And there were hundreds of planes with thousands of passengers over the Atlantic Ocean. And it turns out there was this it was a little city, but it had a huge runway. And it was called, what was it called? It was called Gander, Newfoundland in Canada. And Gander is the most northeastern city in all of North America. And back before planes were as efficient as they are now, most planes had to stop before going over the ocean to refuel. So it had this huge, think of this, 10,000 people in this city, but they have more runways than the San Diego airport. And so this city, Gander, it's a really quirky little town, and on September 11th, they had all the runway in the world, and they were not planning on using it. And so tons of these flights carrying all these people came to Gander, Newfoundland. And these people were stuck. They could not go out. 9/11 shut down the airports, if you remember the day, anybody who was around. And what they did was they opened the city to all these people. They turned the schools into hotels. They invited strangers into their homes. They turned their kitchens into bars. They lived their lives together. They invited these people to become Newfoundlanders. They even had a ceremony that they called a screech in, where they drank this like dark liquor and like had to kiss a cod. It was really weird. But I'm telling you, they figured out how to live in the in-between. Is this making sense? If hope in a future, think about this. If hope in a future is about living in the in-between, if hope in a future is about the next generation, and if hope in the future really is about your relationship with Jesus, what are you waiting for? What I'm trying to say is, you don't have to wait for hope in the future. Hope in the future isn't something we wait for. It's something we get to experience right now. Because we are living in the in-between. Jesus is coming back soon, and until he does, it is going to feel like a holding pattern. Your life, you're never going to feel like you arrive. And even when you get that thing that you think you need to feel like you arrive, you're still not going to feel like you've arrived. You're always going to be stuck in the airport. That same feeling. So let's have hope in the future right now. What are you waiting for? Hope in the future is about living in the in-between. Hope in the future is about accessing your relationship with Jesus. And if you don't know how to, it's just a relationship. You just start talking to him. And you find somebody that has a good relationship with Jesus. And you say, hey, show me how to do that. Come talk to me. Every relationship starts with a conversation. We're about to hear some stories of people who have figured this out. They figured out how to have a real relationship with Jesus that has changed their lives. And so I'm excited for them to get to share. And I'm excited for us to get to experience this hope and a future that we can have right now.